Great. Hi, everyone. You'll have just heard the announcement about the event being recorded, so hopefully you're fine with that. If not, you can leave the meeting and we will be uploading this onto YouTube so you can watch the event afterwards. On behalf of Community Energy England, Scotland and Wales, I'd like to invite you all to the launch of the first UK-wide State of the Sector report, which explores progress across the community energy sector over 2020, the ambition of the sector, and the importance as well of community energy for achieving both net zero and green recovery. I would like to start by giving a heartfelt thanks to the 220 organisations who completed the survey, as I know it is time consuming, but your responses are so important and do provide the basis of our annual State of the Sector report, which also builds upon data received in England, Wales and Northern Ireland over the previous years. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this year's report, which are SP Energy Networks and Northern Powergrid, as well as Helen Seagrave from Electricity North West, who helped us to shape the survey, and they'll be launching a regional version of their State of the Sector report as well. You'll hear more later about the details of the findings from Frankie and Prina, who along with Kerry and Jodie at Regen undertook the data analysis and reporting of this research. But at this point, I'd just like to very briefly give you a bit of background to the research as well as the UK scope. So Community Energy England and Wales first undertook research into the state of the community energy sector back in 2016, with SEEN, which followed some preparatory research which was undertaken for us in England by Quantum Strategy and Technology. Community energy was growing and it was becoming increasingly clear that although there was more interest in community energy, the discussions with government was really showing that there was a distinct lack of understanding of what community energy was doing, what it could achieve, and even in some cases what community energy actually was. So Rob and I decided that we really needed an evidence base which could track activity, identify challenges and obstacles, seek out opportunities, and demonstrate the additional value that community energy brings in order to help us to advocate for funding and other support mechanisms. Since then, the annual State of the Sector has become the linchpin in our advocacy activity, and it also shapes our work programme for the following year. It's also been referenced in dozens of research papers created by politicians and used by civil servants and funders in designing their support frameworks for community energy. This year, thanks to Community Energy Scotland, the survey was opened up to community energy organisations right across Scotland, resulting for the first time a UK-wide evidence base, strengthening that existing evidence, as well as strengthening our collective voice as we all work to ensure that people are put at the heart of the energy system. We'll be hearing from representatives from Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales in the panel session later. I'm sure I won't be giving the game away too much from what Frankie and Prina are going to be saying later by telling you that the State of the Sector survey clearly found that community energy is already playing a crucial role in achieving net zero, as well as playing a critical part in the energy system and in ensuring a just transition through gaining consent, increasing participation and embedding behaviour change. We also found a refocusing within the sector. So with the removal of subsidies such as a feed-in tariff and other financial support, there's been a general move away from purely electricity generation projects to looking at whole systems approach. So things like fuel poverty, demand reduction, as well as more innovative business models around flexibility, transport, supply and heat. 2020 also demonstrated the resilience and the key role that community energy has to play in a green recovery. So we found at Community Energy England, and I'm sure Scotland and Wales did, a real increasing interest from new people and new organisations really starting to explore community energy as a very effective way to tackle climate change at a local level, as well as a way to increase local jobs as an ethical investment opportunity, and also by adapting quickly and flexibly to COVID-19 through, for instance, redirecting community benefit funds to food banks, providing energy debt advice, and so on. And really that strength comes from community energy being embedded within their local communities. It was also clear through survey responses that a long-term, stable and supportive policy environment is needed. And we will be discussing findings of this report with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and other government departments over the coming weeks. There are many challenges ahead and some of these are set out in the report, but there are bright spots too that are highlighted. So we're doing a lot of work on the build up to COP, as this really gives a key opportunity to engage more people in energy, to push for a more supportive policy environment, and really to ensure that there is a legacy from the talks this time. The local electricity bill, being led by Power for People, could potentially enable local energy organisations to sell their electricity directly to local businesses and homes, alleviating pressure on the grid and hopefully reducing network access costs. And the Environmental Audit Committee very recently undertook an inquiry into community energy and presented a list of recommendations to Kwasi Kwarteng to remove barriers to the development of community energy. And there's a real opportunity for us all to really build upon that and push for community energy to be included within the net zero strategy and the upcoming comprehensive spending review in autumn. There is some exciting innovation coming out of the sector, although admittedly many of these models aren't yet replicable. But we'll also hear next an example of what community energy can achieve at scale. There is real potential for community energy. According to research undertaken last year by WPI Economics on behalf of SP Energy Networks and featuring in our community energy vision, community energy by 2030 could contribute over 5 gigawatts, power over 2 million homes, save consumers £150 million and redistribute £90 million to the local economy. The caveat for all of that is supportive policy mechanisms. If you're new to community energy, do look at any of our websites, and there's also information in the report on how you can get involved, as well as information on how to join Community Energy England, Scotland and Wales. And please do share our report and infographics. The reports will be live on all of our websites today, and they'll be emailed out to all delegates later. Lastly, before I hand over, this event is of course part of Community Energy Fortnight, which runs through to the weekend. If you haven't had a chance to get involved yet, you can catch up with events on our YouTube channel. There are resources, there are blogs, we've had Twitter takeovers, we've got lots of different reports coming out as well as short videos. So we will put links in the chat later for where you can find out more information and what we've been up to at Community Energy England and Community Energy Scotland, and also details about the launch of the Welsh report that will be later today. So now I would like to hand over to our keynote speaker, which is Calum MacDonald from Point and Sandwick Trust, which is featured as a case study in the report. And Calum, over to you.
Thanks very much, Emma. And I'm going to try to share my screen and hope that it is of the right thing that I end up sharing. And then unfortunately, I've ended up at the end, so I'm back at the beginning now. I'm very pleased to be asked to talk to you. You'll find that we do pop up in the State of the Sector report that Emma mentioned, that is just being launched as one of the case studies, and that's just a screen grab from that. Can everybody see that? Am I working the thing properly? Yeah. So that is Point and Sandwick Trust. We're a wind farm that is wholly owned by the community. We're situated up in the Western Isles. And just in case people are confused between the Western Isles and the Northern Isles, I know people often are, there's a map that tells you where the Western Isles are. The largest island is called Lewis, and we are very close to where the red spot is on that large island. We're one of a number of community wind farms in the Western Isles. We've got a good solid cluster, as you can see, throughout the island chain. There's a total of 22 megawatts installed, all of them community energy owned. There's another, I think about 18 or 19 megawatts installed that's privately owned. But 22 megawatts installed is a very substantial number, as you'll recognize from your own work. It is actually amounts to about, I think about £30 million of capital investment to get these wind farms in place. which is the largest private sector investment, if you like, call it private sector, ever in the Western Isles area. So it's very substantial, and it is now returning about just over £2 million a year of net income back into the communities. That is profit, if you like, and it goes back into supporting local organizations, local charities, local community projects. In terms of our own contribution here, we account for about just under 1 million of that net income. It's been building up since we started. It's now, last year it was 900,000. Although this year, I'm afraid, and I'll maybe say something about that later on, we haven't had any income because the cable to the mainland has been broken. But that will be shortly fixed. Over the past 5 years, these are some of the figures that we managed to reinvest back into the local community, giving it to a wide range of local organizations. And that amounts to about £2.3 million that has come directly from the wind farm itself. And of course, as you know, from your own experience, once you've got a stream of income like that, you can lever in lots of other funds as well and make it a much bigger total package. So we levered in £2.2 million using that 2.3. So that's £4.5 million basically over the 5 years that has gone into the community. As you can see from the third bullet point, as well as being cash to get projects off the ground and operating, a variety of projects. It ranges from the local hospice, the local arts museum, woodland project. We planted 100,000 trees in the last 3 years of native woodland, helping people with addiction problems, helping young people, people with special needs, a whole wide range, all the different kinds of things that you will all be involved in with your own communities. But as well as supporting these projects with cash, of course, it creates jobs as well. And that's illustrated in the third bullet point. The final bullet point refers to the fact that because we earn actually, frankly, a lot of money, we decided at the very outset that we were going to aim to benefit the whole Western Isles and not just the immediate Point and Sandwick community, which hosts the wind farm. So 40% of our income goes towards the Point and Sandwick community, mostly in a fuel poverty program, but 60% of our income goes to benefit the whole wider Western Isles. And that's a very important principle for us. We don't think there's any point in us doing well if the rest of the islands are not doing so well. So we are very willing and happy to share the benefit. We're now looking towards new projects, as well as obviously always on the lookout for new wind farm projects. We'd like to develop some of these as well. But we've also exploring new opportunities. The picture to the left is the front page of a report we published a couple of years ago, which is into using hydrogen as a marine fuel. And the reason we explored this is because the Western Isles, indeed all the islands on the west coast of Scotland, are serviced by a ferry fleet, a lifeline ferry services. They're publicly owned. They burn lots of dirty diesel. And at some point, they're going to have to transition into a clean fuel. The most obvious one at the moment appears to be hydrogen. So we're looking at the opportunity to make hydrogen using our wind farms local in the islands, and to use that to supply the ferry services on the west coast of Scotland. So we published that a couple of years ago. We are now trying to move on to the second stage. As you can see from the picture there, we had a number of private sector partners to help us explore this topic. We've just been joined by a new partner a company called Ariane. You might have heard of them. They're the European Space Agency. They want to diversify into hydrogen. So you never know, we might be using rocket fuel in the Calum ferries going off to the west coast in the future. To the right is a picture of another project we are pursuing with ENGIE. ENGIE are our off-taker. The local grid is very weak. That's why we're off at the moment, because when the cable to the mainland broke, all the wind farms on the island had to be shut off because the local grid couldn't cope with the intermittent energy. So we're at the moment, the Western Isles, with all those lovely community wind farms, have been powered since last October by a dirty diesel power station in Stornoway. So one of the solutions to that we're looking at is having a grid supporting battery. We're doing that with our off-takers, ENGIE, and we're making good progress on that. We hope that Scottish and Southern will be issuing a tender for a battery supplier later on this year, and we're hopeful that we can win that tender. Looking to the future still further, I'd like to turn to the potential of community energy, because that's one of the big themes of the State of the Sector report. In the past week, we've published we commissioned a report from an independent consultancy called Aquaterra, which has now been launched by Aquaterra with the support of Community Energy Scotland. And as you can see from the headline, what we've done in that report is for the first time make a straight comparison, financial hard cash comparison between community-owned wind farms and conventional wind farms, corporate-owned, private-owned wind farms, which typically pay a community benefit to the local areas in which they're operating. And we're comparing the net income from the community wind farms to that kind of community benefit payment. Community benefit payments are very welcome, but you can see that what we found is that community-owned wind farms, the net income they return to the communities in their areas is 34 times more on average than commercial counterparts. On average, because it'll depend on different circumstances of different wind farms. But looking across a sample of wind farms in Scotland, they found that was the difference, the differential. In other words, to put it more easily, perhaps for people to use, one community turbine is equivalent to 34 commercial turbines in terms of the local economic footprint and the benefit that it generates in your local areas. 10 community turbines is equivalent to 340 private turbines. That is a huge, massive differential. And to me, it exemplifies why community energy should really be a central part of any government's strategy for developing the green economy. How are we doing in Scotland? Was asked to mention that. We do have advantages in Scotland. There is, in particular, there is the CARES Development Fund, which we use for our wind farm. It gives you £150,000 to help in development costs, which is essential. Once you're up and going, you then pay it back. So it's a revolving fund. We've now drawn down another £150,000 to develop our battery project. So it is a hugely valuable resource that we can draw on. But nevertheless, the community sector, although it's relatively larger in UK terms, is not as big, in my view, as it should be. That's a screen grab from Local Energy Scotland website. It's broken down what they call locally owned energy into actual locally owned projects and actual community owned projects. And so you can see most of that category called locally owned is It's basically things where council housing gets solar panels, where there's community halls with a turbine, etc. They're not actually income generating into the local area projects by and large. There'll be some that are, say, projects owned by individual farmers, and that's very welcome, but it's not quite the same as community-owned projects. Of these, we now have 89.2 megawatts installed in Scotland. That is not enough, really. There's 8 gigawatts of energy, of renewable energy installed in Scotland onshore. So we amount to just 1%. It is not big enough. The potential, well, we could look to other countries, in particular Denmark. We've got 1% of the onshore capacity. Denmark, I think it's about 40%. I haven't seen any up-to-date figures. It was bigger than that. But then the government changed direction, I think, in Denmark, domestic policy did, and the proportion has shrunk. I haven't seen the latest figure. All I know is it's a lot bigger than in Scotland or the UK. And to me, that's the kind of target we should be working towards over the very long term. Why has it worked in Denmark? Because, well, here's some of the things that they did. Tax breaks, for example, were provided to incentivize households to buy into cooperatives. There was a positive encouragement to the community, the cooperative, the municipal sector in Denmark to develop green energy. In 2011, they passed a law that all new wind of any kind must include 20% community ownership. So all these things helped, and they are a model for how we should be going forward. And that takes me to my last slide, which is a screen grab from the new report that's just been published by us, by the community energy sector that Emma referred to, and which I think you'll be able to get a lowdown from the websites today. And it's a set of recommendations as to how to develop the community energy sector in Britain. And I think they're absolutely spot on. They've got, they're backed up by recommendations from the Environmental Audit Committee in the House of Commons. I particularly, I think there's 7 recommendations there. I particularly recommend the one that says, I think it's number 4, that we should have fair access to the grid by reserving capacity for community projects. This is one of the biggest problems we continuously face in the north of Scotland, and having reserved capacity, to me, is essential for growing the community energy sector. So that's the end of my talk. So thank you very much indeed for listening, and I hope I've finished on time.
It was perfectly timed. Thanks, Calum. There are links in the chat to the State of the Sector report now, and also Scottish and Welsh specific events taking place to delve into community energy data a little bit more. There's also been a question, but the time, Janet has answered that, but if there are any more questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll pick them up as we go, and also in the panel session as well. So I would like now to take us straight on to the next part, which is Gillian. So Gillian Hurding, who is the RIIO2 Engagement Manager at SP Energy Networks, and also one of the report sponsors. Thanks, Gillian.
We were going to go with Regen next, actually, to introduce the report and the findings.
Oh, sorry, I've got a different order down. I must have copied it down wrong this morning. Sorry, Gillian, we will come back to you.
No worries.
On to Frankie and Prina then now.
Thank you, Emma. So hi, welcome to our presentation. We're from Regen. So Regen is a not-for-profit centre for expertise, and our mission is to transition to a decarbonised, decentralised and democratised energy system. And as part of that, for the past 10 years, Regen has been working in the community energy sector across the country, and in loads of different ways. We run forums and we also write energy strategies, and we have helped out with the community energy state of sector research and report. So firstly, as Emma mentioned, an absolute huge thank you to the hundreds of you that completed the survey. Without you, there would not have been any presentation from me, or it would have been a very boring report. So very thank you indeed. And this year we added some questions in surrounding the impacts of the pandemic. And we added a couple more about the social benefits as well to really draw out the added social benefit that community energy brings. As Emma mentioned, this is the first year that Scotland was involved, which really gave us a new perspective in a new regulatory environment, and also expanded our data set, obviously, to include the whole of Scotland. We included many case studies. We've already heard from Point and Sandwick and the incredible work they're doing. And we also have included Gower Power, Co-Cars, and plenty of others, as you'll be able to see in the report itself. The key findings, Emma's mentioned a few of these before, but we found that community energy is playing an absolutely crucial role in achieving net zero, not only in the megawatts in the renewable energy generation, but also just in the absolute reach that it has within its communities. So as you can see from the graphic, community energy organisations reached over 358,000 people just in 2020 alone. And secondly, it demonstrated the resilience and key role of community energy. As I mentioned before, we asked a lot of questions about how COVID had impacted, but also what community energy organisations did to help their communities during COVID. And we got so many responses, which Frankie will dive into a little bit later. We saw a refocusing of the sector. There are now more organisations going into energy efficiency, low carbon transport, a lot interested in innovation. And again, Frankie's going to go into a little bit more of the detail about what's happening there. And lastly, repeatedly throughout the survey process, organisations told us about the need for the right policy support for their success and for community energy to scale up to the necessity that we are to reach net zero. I'm just going to pass over to Frankie now. He's going to go through some of the data bits.
Yes, this is a graphic from the newly published report, and I've just seen a link being posted in the chat. And so you can get this graphic and all the other graphics in the reports, as well as the report themselves, from the website in the link. So please do use these. I do hope they are useful for other purposes, other presentations. Delighted to see Calum already using them in his. So this is our summary graphic, really trying to condense everything that the data showed us into a single page. 424 organisations, community energy organisations, that is, identified across the UK, and covering over 431 full-time equivalent roles, and reporting 84 new jobs created in the last challenging year. So some real points of hope amongst what was an incredibly challenging year for the sector as well as the country. We've come to a total of 319 megawatts of community energy installed renewable electricity, which is up by last year from 8 megawatts. And the data in the survey really just showed us the breadth of activities that community organisations are installed in, the huge sums of money that are being retained and generated for their local area, the quantity of money that is being diverted for COVID relief that I'll be speaking about in a bit, and also just the range of activities as well. We've got hundreds of groups working in energy efficiency and fuel poverty alleviation, using their full-time staff, their volunteers, members, and engaging the wider community, over 350,000 people, on energy, on climate change, and issues local to their area. So I'm just going to cover a few of the data trends that came out from the answers to the survey. So the big one and the main one, clearly, renewable electricity installation has reduced in development this year. Clearly it was a challenging year, but also the sector is facing some headwinds. But we still saw 8 megawatts of renewable electricity generation installed across the country. Almost over 90% of this is solar PV, and most of that on rooftops. domestic, but mainly community buildings, schools, hospitals, those sorts of buildings. This is down from 15 megawatts last year, but interestingly, we still have a similar number of groups active in this space and still managing to get projects through against serious challenges. So yeah, there's still a great manner of hope there, and some groups beginning to look for economies of scale as well, in moving from rooftop to the large developments as we've seen in their detailed future plans. Another data trend is around low carbon transport. So this is an emerging area, and groups are reporting an increased interest in this. So last year across England and Wales, 47 community organisations were active in this space, and this has increased to 59, so almost 60 groups this year. And then when we include Scotland, as we've done in this survey, that increases to 76. But this isn't only purchasing electric vehicles, but we can see that community energy groups take a much wider community view of the decarbonisation of transport. So in our responses to the survey, we've seen that it's not just electric vehicles, but it's providing electric vehicle chargers, community car clubs, electric bikes and scooters, educational workshops around what is this electric vehicle, how do I charge it, what is, how do I deal with range anxiety, that sort of stuff, as well as combining electric vehicle charge points alongside existing renewable installations so that those vehicles are powered with low carbon electricity. So I think this is a real example of where groups have taken what is a hot topic in the decarbonisation space of low carbon transport and really taken a very wide social justice view on the situation. Another point that I think Emma alluded to was the great innovative energy in the community organisations that responded to the survey. So although small scale renewables business model remains challenging, some are trying to go much larger, develop economies of scale there. Others are really expanding into retrofit business models, innovation projects with network operators, engaging in this idea of flexibility. How do we balance the grid as we move to a much more highly renewable system in a net zero world? And this has been an increase on 2019, where these projects were already running. As Calum wonderfully demonstrated in his presentation, groups are aware of and they know of the particular energy demands and requirements of their area. So in some areas it will be hydrogen, and that will be the solution. In some areas, in others, it might be off-gas homes that are hard to treat with energy efficiency, that need an in-depth working community model to help them work through those. So we just pulled out a couple of examples from the answers we got to the survey there. CARE, who are working for green hydrogen, and the BHESCO, who are working in rural areas to work for energy efficiency and fuel alleviation. In the map that we've got there on the right, this is the renewable wind, solar PV and hydropower across the UK. And I think what's nice about this is it just demonstrates the range of things, but also the regional variations within the sector. Partly this is policy. The onshore wind is much more prevalent in Scotland compared to England, but also this follows resources available. Clearly we see that the dominance of hydropower up the western side of Scotland as well. Throughout the pandemic, community groups have faced their own share of troubles, having to shield and quarantine and not being able to make full use of the person-to-person workshops that have worked so well in engaging their local areas in energy efficiency, for example. However, we've seen them innovate and get around these troubles. Lots of groups reported running workshops, online, phone calls, house visits, and reworking their local reach to ensure that even in this troubling year, we are still reaching people engaging in fuel poverty alleviation as such. So we asked in the survey about financial support, about house visits and social support. £200,000 of financial assistance directly for COVID-19 was redistributed by community organisations, 83 groups involved across the country, as you can see on that map. But although we asked this narrow question, we also got lots of responses detailing the wonderful things that groups are also doing. So food collection and redistribution, free EV charging for key workers, continuing their energy advice services online, and even 3D printing masks and PPE. So real wonderful breadth of activities there in response to a real challenging 2020. I think I'm going to pass over back to Prina now, who's going to talk you through some of the common themes that the survey respondents were feeding back to us.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Frankie. Those data trends, I really hope that's kind of inspired your curiosity to go look a bit deeper into our report and see what other trends have showed up and what's been going on in the sector. So yeah, we often, in the survey, we offered the chance for respondents to give us slightly longer answers, see what they're thinking and what they need, basically. So in one of the questions, we kind of came up with 4 main themes. So firstly, if you look at the top right, we can see that a lot of organisations were calling for the government to be doing more. So the government and other policy changes that are needed. And that was kind of a common theme throughout the survey. There was also some comments about the capacity, so the need for more volunteers. It's been a really, really difficult year, as Frankie mentioned, in terms of COVID. So a lot of volunteers who were usually quite regular had to take a step back, and this impacted the sector quite a bit. And we've mentioned in Calum's presentation the scale aspect of it, and quite a few groups mentioned the need to work together with different community organisations to build larger projects. And we have a case study of this within the report as well. There was a lot of hope within the answers as well. So here you can see that I think someone said, I think the future is looking really promising for community energy. But obviously there is work that needs to be done. And again, there's a lot more detail within the report about exactly what that might include. And just lastly, we wanted to end on the future ambitions of the sector. Now, in the future ambitions section of the survey, there were hundreds and hundreds of responses and ideas of what people wanted to do and what they're planning to do. So this is just a very small selection, but it really, really ranged from low carbon transport to heat, to a lot of people getting into energy efficiency and retrofitting, and using the community benefit funds from their projects to support their local communities. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to myself and Frankie, and I really hope that it's inspired you to go and have a look at the reports. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Frankie and Prina. That was a really great run through, and also thanks for your hard work going through all of that data. We really appreciate everything that you've done. Some bits and bobs in the chat. So comments from Wirral Hub House really driving home the importance of this document in terms of advocacy, and the desire as well as the need for us to be sending politicians and parliamentarians of needs around supportive policy mechanisms to make sure that we can continue to grow as a sector. Other comments about report findings showing how community rather than straight commercial outfits, the added direct and co-benefits, a legion in comparison in community energy. And then before we move on, I just want to put a couple of specific questions around the data to you, Frankie and Prina. One question is, is it that half of last year's new generation was just by one group in Wales then, Egni Co-op? I know they were quite substantial.
Yeah, some groups have installed amazing amounts, really. And I can't comment on the particular project without diving into the data, but I know that you at Community Energy England do have a version of the database that can be queried. So for sure, it's definitely possible. There were some real inspiring stories of groups getting a huge number, like many megawatts of solar through. So it's definitely potentially possible, yeah.
Great, thanks. And Rob's put a link in the chat as well that there's a launch of a Welsh report this afternoon as well, which I'm sure Rob will be going into more detail on all of that. There's a question around how many organisation projects in England and how many in Wales. Now that is in the report. I'm putting you a bit on the spot. Do you have the figures for those, or?
Is that the total number of groups in England and Wales in that chat? We have that in the summary graphic. I think I pulled out Scotland because when I want to compare the data numbers to the previous year, which we only did England and Wales, it's not comparing apples and oranges, is it, to say we went from 46 groups to 79 up in Scotland, so including up in Scotland. So that's why I've done that direct comparison just to England and Wales in that section. But as you say, the report is UK based, but we do break out differences in the nations. We also have the Welsh version of this report with much more detail about Wales than that.
And I think that was one of the challenges. I mean, it's such a strength now that it's a UK-wide report, but it was that challenge of tracking data in England, Wales and Northern Ireland throughout, but then bringing new data in from Scotland. So I think that also added to the complexity, I think, for some people of actually completing the survey as well. So this was the most difficult year, and it will get easier for everyone as we move forward as that UK-wide survey. Renewable heat and fuel poverty projects anywhere, question mark. What was the trend around heat over the last year?
I think the heat remains a challenging business model. We have seen some real innovation in that area, and there are a few case studies. I think I mentioned the HESCO sort of quite inspiring story down in the south of England. I think we see the challenge of deep retrofit and energy efficiency that we need in across the UK can have real regional variations, and I do think that is an area where community sector has a real strength, because the localization of those projects, it will never be a national rollout. It will always have to be a local benefits and that sort of thing. For heat, we haven't got a map on that in the reports, but it is definitely there in the data and split out by regions as well.
Yeah, heat is still a very small part of community energy, but it's definitely a growing area and a growing area of interest. And in England, there's lots of stuff coming through the Rural Community Energy Funds, so there'll be lots of learning being shared over the next year or two. And then the last question I'll pick up was around big gaps for no community energy and huge swathes of the eastern side of the UK with seemingly no projects, and if this is because there are no groups or are there other perceived reasons. It's something that we are looking at in detail. I think often you tend to find once you have an experienced group, others follow. So you tend to get clusters in different areas, and also where things like they've had a particularly supportive local authority area or local enterprise partnership and so on, then that's really helped. I think we are starting to see a spread across the country, but you're right, there are still big gaps. And I think one key thing of taking that forward is regional infrastructure and regional networks. So you'll see, particularly in the south, there's a lot of groups, and that is in part to the strong support that Community Energy South plays, and then the same in London. So I think we really need to look at how we spread that peer mentoring, peer learning and regional networks in other parts of the UK as well. There are a couple of other questions around floating wind, Northern Ireland and so on, but I think we'll pick that up in the panel session. So thanks again very much, Frankie and Prina. And I now will hand over to Gillian from SP Energy Networks. Thanks, Gillian.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks very much for inviting us along today. Actually, was planning just to talk on a couple of things really, just to sort of explain to you how we're planning to make use, I guess, of the state of the sector reports and the data here at SP Energy Networks, and then also just very briefly outline sort of three specific things, three specific activities or opportunities that I was keen to just tell you all about today. But obviously it's great to see the report coming through today. This is Spen's third year sponsoring the report. And for those of you that might not know, Spen is the only distribution network operator in GB to cover sort of England, Scotland and Wales. So we're obviously very pleased to see the addition of the Scottish data this year. And just that opportunity to get that sort of first-hand or community-led kind of feedback into the barriers and opportunities facing local groups. It's really helpful for us in terms of how we can respond to those groups and how we can best support them to have that kind of first-hand picture and data coming through. I suppose I'm also pleased to see the addition of the Scottish data. It's good to have something else Scottish to focus on apart from the football. Won't mention too much more about that. But it also, it really helps us to think to do that comparison piece and sort of really understand some of the nuances in terms of, the different factors across the three countries, network conditions, levels of government support, geographies, etc., and how that's all impacting. And again, that allows us to tailor our support towards, those different needs across the areas that we serve. And I suppose it's always, good just to be seeing kind of from those front running projects for whatever reasons that they've managed to succeed, to be able to take the learning from those, really dedicated communities that we know they work so hard and so tirelessly to produce these successful projects. And just making sure that we're able to take the learning from those projects and to disseminate it, I guess, across to other communities at varying stages of coming forward with their own project. So in terms of community energy and SP energy network, I suppose the kind of key aspects that I wanted to highlight for you today, and sort of keen to keep it brief because I'm sort of keen to get into the discussions part, but was really just to outline to you that we'll be using these state of the sector reports, as I mentioned, to help us prepare our draft strategies for how we'll be supporting community energy over the next 5 years particularly. And clearly that's obviously, a very key time to keep things moving and to be working cross-sectorally, to be working with local groups so that we can ensure, a focused and just net zero transition. And we plan to use a regional version of the state of the sector data that the three community energy groups are obviously supporting and providing, to make sure that we're able to report on how our proposals are actually, or our proposed activity is actually having an impact. So we'll use the regional data that we collate year on year to make sure that what we're doing is working, and if it's not, that we'll be able to update our approaches and to revise our approaches. So it's really, I think, again, just really sort of testament to having this really valuable data source and being able to sort of reflect on things annually in that way, so that we can continue to meet the needs of communities and to be kind of nuanced in that approach and to be flexible in that approach too, because clearly, with things like the pandemic, for example, throwing up, that we don't know how those needs may or change over the coming years, but we know that we need to keep moving and that we need to keep supporting. The second thing that I wanted to sort of highlight to you was that we are also, we've also produced just last year, and again, we're grateful for help from Community Energy Scotland and support from Community Energy England and Wales, is that we have made available a free online Zero Carbon Communities Hub resource. So I'll put the link for that into the chat below. And for those of you that are not familiar, it's basically sort of our attempt working with the community groups to put everything that you might need to know in relation to starting a community energy project into one place. And that information should be relevant to all groups, no matter where you are sort of across GB. And it has information signposting, information towards funding and so on. But particularly the part that I think is really valuable and really nice is that there's a collection of case studies of existing community energy projects on the site there. So if you do go on and your own project's not there and you'd like it to be included, obviously please feel free to let me know. But again, it just sort of, the projects are categorized by type, so you can have a look, and if there's a specific project that you think that would be suitable for your community area, you can have a search through there and also reach out to other communities that might have already done something similar. The third thing that I was keen just to touch on was our independent report that we also relied on information with and collaboration with the community energy charities on, but we produced an independent report at the start of 2020, which was called The Future of Community Energy. And just to highlight that one too, because in that report it sort of highlights or provides a comprehensive overview of the potential impact of the sector, but it also presents various growth scenarios depending on various levels of support being in place. So again, I'll put a link to that in the chat, but it's been picked up quite a lot, but it's quite useful in terms of putting policy debate forward as well. So finally, just to conclude, just to highlight to you, I mentioned that we were currently in the process of putting together our proposals for community energy, our draft strategy on how we plan to support the sector. Again, very pleased that the three community energy bodies are helping us with that. They're advising us and also challenging us on that document. So we're now at the stage that we have created a draft strategy document, and we've got essentially the next sort of 5 or 6 months to really refine that document, really shape it into what it needs to be. So I'll be sharing that, or Spen will be sharing that in the next month or so. And it's really just to sort of ask you to please feel free to feed into that document and help us to, to make sure that we're getting it right. It is really so important to sort of hear from you, is this what you need from us? And to have the conversations and for us to explain, I guess, the challenges or the different sort of needs that we're balancing, where some of our proposals might seem a bit, might not make so much sense, or where some of them might feel like we could be doing more. It's really good, I think, to have those types of discussions with you and have those sort of cross-sector discussions too. So I'll leave it there, but I'll just thank you again for inviting Spen along to talk with you today. As I say, really welcome the opportunity to continue conversations with you. Also, I'll put my contact details below. I'm giving myself a very long admin list for after this call, but I'll put my details in the chat below. Also, obviously, welcome the opportunity to speak to sort of my other DNO colleagues too, as to how we kind of all come together and produce kind of a strategic support and nuanced support to meet local needs, but trying to streamline that support for our community groups too. So thanks again, and well done to you all for getting the report published, and thank you to all the communities that have contributed. It's really great to see you all.
Great, thanks Gillian, and I definitely back that plea. Do get in touch with your local distribution network operator with any kind of barriers, what you're up to and so on, as it really does help them. It's such a key time at the moment to be influencing their upcoming business plans. I'd now like to invite Onda, our other sponsor, so Sustainability Manager from Northern Powergrid, to speak.
Thank you very much, Emma, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here for the launch of this very, very important report, to hear your presentations and to share some of our work. My name is Onda Baumerte. I am the Community Energy Lead for Northern Powergrid. And I will be sharing some slides, which I hope will appear in your screens very soon. As our name suggests, we are Northern. So Northern Powergrid serves about 3.9 million homes and businesses across the North East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire. As a local network, we are an enabler for decarbonisation. But we also recognize we have that regional presence and that regional reach, coupled with energy expertise, which has put us in position to be able to support community energy projects and different local stakeholders in their local ambitions and projects they want to realize. And here particularly we look at the state of the sector report to understand how the sector looks across the UK and what are the differences between the national and the regional trends and developments, and also to refine our approach to providing support locally. In previous years, we've seen that the North East and Yorkshire is a little bit lagging behind in terms of the number of community energy projects or a number of groups even. So I'm really keen to explore this year's data and understand whether that gap is closing. And we hope it is, and we're going to continue providing our support to make sure that the sector thrives locally as well as nationally. But I'll start with some more interesting news. I want to share about some of the work we're doing, but with a more interesting bit, funding. In 2015, we set up our first community fund called Community Seed Fund. to support community energy projects in our region, and then to amplify its reach and the funding available. In 2018, we merged with Northern Gas Network, so we are covering a slightly larger area and we have double the funding available. The exciting bit about that is that the next round opens on 28th of June, so in a few days' time. If you're launching a project locally in North, please have a look and we'll welcome your applications. It is administered by the Elite Community Foundation, and it will be and all applications go through their website. Then kind of turning to how our support has shaped more recently. So since 2015, we've done a number of things, but in 2020, we reached out to 17 groups, 17 community energy groups we knew in our region, interviewed them, and based on their feedback, we built our community energy engagement strategy. So this was published last year, and we've made 26 commitments in the strategy to listen to our communities, to inform them, to engage with them, empower them, and advocate for them. And today, a year on, I want to share some of the highlights of what we've done in the last year, which really emphasizes how the engagement and the activity has really ramped up, and that is through a combination of things. And I believe that the net zero targets, as well as the support available and what the awareness level have really contributed to that. So a year on, when we look at what our 26 commitments, we've completed 19. Pulling together this update, I was quite surprised myself how much we've managed to achieve in the first year since publishing the strategy. We also have 7 actions that are on track, so we've completed our annual target, but we have a number of ongoing actions up to 2023. What is quite significant, though, is when we were writing the strategy, we knew about 20-ish groups across our regions, and now when we're putting the update together, that number had increased to over 50. So there's definitely a trend of growth in the region. We also quite significantly had reached more than 3,000 community energy stakeholders through various engagement activities over the past year. We've published, we've created a new community energy web page with our contact details. So in case you had any questions or you wanted to get in touch with Northern Powergrid, you can do that. And I'll share the email shortly. We've also hosted a number of events, and we'll be continuing to do that annually. In addition to our open events, which are open to everyone, which region you might belong to, or consider yourself being, they're open to everyone. We also set up a community energy stakeholder panel to act as a scrutiny group on the actions we're doing to support our community energy, and also a little bit wider than that. And we send out quarterly newsletters. We had a great number of direct and indirect conversations across the last year, and these are just the highlights. A more detailed update is published on our webpage. But what I'm really pleased to say is that all this engagement for the past year really counted, and we were very privileged and very thrilled to be able to share the feedback that we've had received through our conversations, our events, and our activities from community groups across our region with the Environmental Audit Committee, as well as with Ofgem and BEIS this year. Our written evidence to the Environmental Audit Committee, as well as the oral evidence session recordings, are available from the internet if you'd like to access those. But let's look forward for a little bit. I should mention that on those 26 commitments, we've perhaps delivered somewhat more that we initially set out to do in 2020. And it is because we listened to that feedback from our stakeholders, from community energy groups in our region, in those local events, and we refine the approach and the support mechanisms that we provide, and we're going to continue doing that. And here are a couple few things that we're considering for the near term. First of all, capacity building events. Many speakers today have already told and kind of recognized the importance of peer-to-peer training and the importance of growing that expertise in local groups and skilling up, if you like. And we have therefore held 2 training sessions this year, the recordings of which will be available from our website. But we're planning to hold more events where community energy practitioners, established experts, are able to share their experience with other groups and sessions which are practical and help in that capacity building, which is one of the key differences, I suppose, from our region, kind of nationally. That was one of the key barriers identified last year.
Sorry, just one minute, that's okay.
Additional piece of exciting news is that we are, in addition to our community partnering fund, which I shared earlier, we have earmarked a sum that we're looking to provide for support for community groups in terms of direct funding or capacity building in the next year. So please look out for that. And then looking from 2023 to onwards, we'll also see that there might be a role for regional community energy advisors. And we'd be interested to what you hear, what you think about that. So we're planning to add community energy advisors to each of our operating regions for 2023 to help with that local networking, knowledge building, signposting, and expertise that you might require. Everything that I've mentioned today is available from our webpage, and that is our email. If you're a community energy group and you want to discuss community and things, please do reach out through that email. That's the best way to reach us at the moment. And do please join our events in the future. We'll be really looking forward to seeing you in our community energy forums. One just passed in June, but the next one will be taking place in September. And again, thank you very much for all the effort that is going into the state of the sector report. It's absolutely invaluable insight into the benefits that the community energy brings. And it's great to see how that evolves from year to year. I hope this information was useful, and I'm really looking forward to working with all of you in the future. Do reach out to us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anda and Gillian. Thanks both for the sponsorship of the report, but also for you supporting an individual capacity as well. The Powergrid has been really, really helpful over the last couple of years, so thank you. I'd now like to hand over to Philip to take over as we move into the panel session.
Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm just going to sort of be the chair of the panel session. The idea is to just get some different perspectives from the 4 nations. And I'm delighted to introduce my 4 panelists. So we have Janet Foggie, who's Chief Executive of Community Energy Scotland. We have Rob Proctor, Business Development Manager from Community Energy Wales, both of which have been influential and sort of integral to shaping the report and the process this year. Karen Arbuckle is the chair of Northern Ireland Community Energy. We've asked her to come along to again represent the Northern Ireland sector. There isn't an equivalent body in terms of Community Energy England style in Northern Ireland, but Karen is very experienced in the sector in Northern Ireland, so it's great to have her here. Helen Seagrave is the Community Energy Manager from Electricity North West, which is the distribution network operator in that part of England, and Helen has also been a long-standing supporter and involved with the community, with the state of the sector research. They'll be producing their own report this year and launching that very soon. So yeah, Helen's very experienced too, and it's great to have all 4 here. So I'm going to start by posing a question to Janet to continue the theme of the day, which is UK-wide reports, Scotland involved for the first time. So Janet, what are the key lessons from including Scottish community energy organisations in state of the sector this year? What do you think the value is for the sector of having brought them into the process?
Morning, Philip. I think that it is extremely important that Scotland has joined the State of the Sector report. It's great to see the comparative data grow and to see the data sets grow. I think we were particularly pleased within Community Energy Scotland that 72 organisations responded in the first call. to answer the questions for the first time takes a bit more effort than if one's used to annually putting the data in. And also that there were 18 new jobs in community energy in Scotland in 2020 is a great statistic to pull out of that report. And a total of 110 megawatts of operational community-owned projects. So it's been great to gather that data and to be part of a wider comparison. And I'm hoping that as we work together going forwards, the report will build. And so Scotland will continue to be an integral part of it.
Thanks, Janet. Rob, speaking from a more experienced perspective with the state of the sector, how do you see the sort of Welsh position? What's the key differences in Wales? What can you tell us about the Welsh landscape?
Yeah, well, I think one of the great things this year is the fact that we've managed to get funding for a standalone Welsh State of the Sector report. So what that enables us to do is look in much more detail about the differences between, within Wales and England and Scotland and Northern Ireland. So I think that's been really, really helpful. And again, I think what it really shows is the sort of resilience of the sector. I think all the devolved nations suffer from the same challenges and impacts from UK government policy, particularly regarding the change in the feed-in tariff, which has had by far the greatest impact on all the sort of community energy organisations. But I think what we can start to see is the sort of slight differences between the nations. And what I'm hoping with the new Welsh report is that we can really use this to look at Wales and look at what the Welsh government can actually do to support the sector in Wales, and perhaps overcome some of the challenges that we're facing as a result of UK government policy. And I think the learning from what's happening in England, what's happening in Wales, what's happening in Scotland and other places, the fact that we're all communicating, we're linked together, and we're sharing that good policy, good practice and good policies across those nations can really help drive the whole sector forward across the UK.
Thanks, Rob. So Karen, I'll pick that straight up, because Rob mentioned there the experience of being a nation with a devolved government and the sort of the split UK policy and then the devolved policy. So can you tell us a little bit about the Northern Ireland experience and how you found the government support within your country, or lack of?
We are tremendously envious of the rest of the UK. Unfortunately, as many of you will know, our devolved government hasn't really been in operation a large part of the last 5 years. So that has hindered policy development terribly. Approximately 50% of our consumption is from renewables. But unfortunately, the subsidies that were put in place for renewable technologies, there was no support built into that to develop community energy like yourselves have enjoyed. So we don't have community energy development programs, we don't have a development body, and that has hindered the growth of the sector, basically, because community energy groups in Northern Ireland simply can't compete with the larger players. There's many other barriers in terms of getting access to the grid. We don't have the socialised costs that GB has. So there's a considerable number of risks for a startup group, and that just puts people off. But hopefully, as we now have the devolved government back in place, we have a new energy strategy coming, and we are in talks with the Department for Economy and working with them to try and develop a space for community energy that has been long overdue in Northern Ireland.
Great, thanks, Karen. It's yeah, definitely interesting. I think many people here won't have had much of an insight into Northern Ireland, so it's good, great to hear. Helen, sort of speaking from another small region, what do you see in the Northwest? So obviously all within the English nation, but How do you see the Northwest specifically, and what have you drawn out of the report this year that kind of helps you understand the Northwest in particular?
So we find the state of the sector really contributes to our evidence base for how we're going to provide our support to the community energy sector, and it supplements the other sort of evidence that we gather through our stakeholder engagement. And what I really took from this year's report is the ambition of the sector, which is what we've been hearing as well through our engagement for developing our new business plan. So yeah, whilst there wasn't much generation connected last year, community energy owned generation, there's an awful lot of planning going on. So I think there's something like 3.8 megawatts identified as planned projects. There is a lot of projects going on around electric vehicle charging points and retrofitting and whole approach to, or whole system approaches to how communities can decarbonise across all the different types of energy uses. So I think what I mainly took from it was the ambition of the sector, which is really useful from our point of view, because it sort of helps to endorse our approach for supporting the sector. Because if we know our customers want to reach net zero, faster, and they want our help for us, it means we can be ambitious in our support for helping them to do that.
Great, thanks. Janet, returning to Scotland, do you see the same kind of ambition in the sector up there?
Yes, I think we do have a lot of ambition in the sector. We have, like everybody else, some challenges to face, and one of our challenges is grid connection. Some of our community wind farms, like other electricity providers, are curtailed at times, and so we have some challenges to overcome in fulfilling our ambitions. But I think that doesn't mean to say that we're not planning. I think people have a very positive attitude, and particularly in inclusion and EV use, and in looking at how we can do heat in buildings. We've had the SMILE project at Community Energy Scotland, looking at heat pumps and how we actually make heat in buildings work for the future. These things are really important, and the ambition to scale them up and to try and have a holistic approach is definitely there.
Thanks. And then Rob, returning to Wales then, I know that there's a 1 gigawatt locally owned renewable energy target in Wales. We're talking about ambition, and that's a stated ambition from the devolved government. How has that influenced the growth of community energy sector?
I mean, I think it's a good target. I think hopefully Welsh Government will exceed it. I think they could probably challenge themselves a bit further on it. But I guess the one thing about that target is it's not specifically just about community energy. It's about local energy, which includes public energy, Welsh businesses, the energy that they own, households, farms, etc. So community energy is still only a very small percentage of that. So as we saw in the report, 22 megawatts of a 1,000 megawatt ambition. So we're only sort of at the moment sort of around about 2% of that target is community owned. So I think there's a lot more to be done on that. Welsh Government have also announced that all new renewable energy projects should have an element of local ownership, which again is helping us as a sector to start to engage with the private developers in terms of having in terms of looking at a share of ownership on new projects going forward. But I think again, I agree with Helen about the ambition. What's really exciting in Wales, a lot of the generation that happened last year was from Egnicot, which was the largest rollout of rooftop solar in the UK, of community-owned rooftop solar in the UK. Incredibly ambitious project. There's another organisation, Ani Newydd, which are looking to develop a 30 megawatt solar farm, which would be the largest community energy project in the UK if it goes ahead. So there's a huge amount of ambition. And also, I think, particularly in Wales, there's a real opportunity for the Welsh Government to really accelerate and increase the amount of community energy quite substantially. And we've actually, at our launch this afternoon of the State of Sector Report, we're also going to be launching our manifesto for community energy, which is specifically targeting things that the Welsh Government has within its powers to do that could support the sector in Wales. So hopefully, that will start having some impacts over the coming years.
Thanks. So the kind of influence of the Welsh Government there is interesting. And then returning back to Northern Ireland, Karen, you mentioned the future energy strategy that the government's working on, what would you like to see from that, and what kind of sort of new policies and things in terms of increased support would be most beneficial for you?
We've quite a long wish list, I have to say, but the first thing is a community energy policy. We don't have one in Northern Ireland, and with that community energy policy, we want dedicated funding to go along with that for the duration of the energy strategy. Our energy strategy is bringing forward plan to 2050, so that's a considerable period of time. We want to redress the imbalance. At present, we can't compete with the large developers. So we're asking for things like presumption in favour of community energy development in terms of both grid connection, planning processes. Our planning processes typically take over a year to 18 months, far too long. And they're very expensive. So things like that could enable community energy groups to get off the ground, basically is where we're starting from. There are other mechanisms in terms of tax, which I think all of the other groups are seeking as well. And we haven't actually set a target for community energy in Northern Ireland. We don't believe it's about the targets at the minute. It's just changing the mindset that so far we've been concentrated on renewable energy, and it doesn't matter where that has come from. So we're trying to get the shift to government basically to understand that there's an incredible amount of benefit to community energy ownership and getting them to support that.
Thanks, Karen. That sounds like a wish list, I think, in terms of that kind of support that will be echoing around the whole of the UK. And in terms of government understanding the benefits of community energy and responding to it, I think one of the things that's been picked up in the chat here is about the local electricity bill and sort of interest in that. And I know that it's something which has quite a high profile in terms of a particular angle of supporting community energy. Helen, I'm just going to ask you about it because I know that Electricity North West have supported it. So I just wanted to ask how you sort of see it, the kind of help it might offer to community energy, and if you know the sort of current status of it, then that would be helpful too.
Certainly. So regulation and how it relates to the ability of local and community energy groups to supply and get an income for their generation has been an issue highlighted by our stakeholders the whole time I've been doing this engagement for the last nearly 4 years. And that's very much the fact that the system isn't really set up at the moment to make it easy for local and small groups to supply an end customer without having to go through an intermediary supply company. So we've supported the local electricity bill very much because it seems to be wanting to solve that issue. Obviously, there's no details into the bill as to how that issue would be solved, and I think there's lots of potential different ways it could be solved, but that's why we've supported the bill. My understanding is that it isn't currently being discussed as a bill in Parliament. However, the backbench session that Weira's mentioned that she's put forward and is going to be discussed next Thursday is an opportunity, I think, maybe for that to resurface, but I don't understand the details of how the Parliament operates and exactly what would happen as a result of that. But like I said, we support it because our stakeholders have said that being able to supply end customers would help make more projects viable because it gives them a greater income.
I think that's a good example of how various different things interact in the sense of state of the sector. I believe has helped you understand what your stakeholders need from that perspective. That feeds into how organisations like Electricity North West, as well as Community Energy England ourselves, support things like the local electricity bill, because we understand that it's one way of potentially supporting the sector, and then we interact with MPs and people like Vera and try to kind of influence them and help them understand what the sector needs. So that's just a good example of how state of the sector and the data-driven aspect to it, the connection with community energy organisations directly kind of helps feed into a lot of the other work that goes on across the sector. Janet, sort of Karen mentioned the planning and her sort of wishes for that aspect of the process in Northern Ireland. I know that Scotland has some different rules about planning, and that's particularly influenced the wind aspect of community energy. So yeah, just wondering if you could kind of comment on the differences there, and then how that's played a role in the sector. I know I've got a question here. I was going to ask you about the higher levels of community benefit expenditure in Scotland, and I wondered whether the wind is connected to that.
Yes, I think there is a connection there, and I think Calum spelt it out very well in his opening remarks that Scotland has copious amounts of wind, which does mean we all wear anoraks, but it also means that we can generate quite large amounts of electricity, and particularly in areas of Scotland where there might not be other sort of industrial type jobs. So out in the Western Isles and in Orkney and in Shetland, wind has been a very big factor. The Scottish Government have been supportive of community energy for the last 10 years, and they have provided support through the CARES programme. I put the link for that up in the chat so that people can see it. And we ourselves have written a report last year called the Next Steps Report, which outlines how we could improve that community benefit number, how we could work to make sure that Scotland's community energy increases, but also the amount that we distribute increases from those projects. So I think we have been fortunate in having a sympathetic environment, both in terms of the wind whistling past our ears, but also the policy and funding that's been available to Scottish projects.
Great, thanks. So yeah, how about we go back to Wales then? Rob, what do you think, building on the state of the sector? I know that you've had your kind of nation-specific report as well. Just to trail again, that there's being launched this afternoon. The link to that event has been in the chat a few times, but I'm sure we'll post it again. When you look forwards, what do you see in terms of the future for community energy in Wales?
I'm really excited that we've got a new government in Wales, and I think I'm also really excited that we now have a climate change minister and a deputy climate change minister that is responsible for housing, energy, or basically anything energy related is all under their sort of in their brief. And I think it's recognizing that all these things are connected, and that all these things have are related to climate change. So we have to deal with all those areas. So I think that's exciting. We haven't yet been able to have a sort of discussion with the new government about our manifesto, but they're certainly aware of it, and I think we'll be having sort of discussions with them about that. But I think this is the state of the sector report is a great opportunity. It's a great baseline. We can look at where we are now. I think in terms of the sector's ambitions, they're much more significant, and I think the sector would be frustrated that there's not more happening in Wales than there is currently. But I think there's a lot of ambition. There's some really significant things that Welsh Government could do that I think could really accelerate growth in the community energy sector. And I think also what's great to see is the diversification of projects that groups are being involved with, moving away from just energy generation to energy efficiency and transport and things like that. And I think communities see the holistic vision, and governments, well, certainly in Wales, they're now sort of starting to follow and recognise that sort of you need to look at things that holistically. And I think I hope that they will also recognise the value of the community energy sector in that and work with us to deliver that vision.
Thanks, Rob. I think that although that was a Welsh-specific perspective, I think that does kind of sum up quite well the whole of the UK. And just to remind everyone that what we've done here is just give a little bit of an insight into the four nations, but what the state of the sector report does is bring that together to highlight the differences and the trends across the whole country. So do recommend again to have a look at it, a read through, and hopefully that proves useful to you to understand community energy as it is and where it can go. So thanks very much to all four panelists. That was brief, but I hope an interesting kind of delve into the regional perspectives. And I'll hand over now to Janet just to close the event. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Philip. And I just briefly want to say a thanks to Community Energy England, who have led on this report for many years. Thanks to Emma for speaking and chairing, and to all our speakers this morning. We've had key themes, I think, of progress in the sector, which is great to chart and monitor and see, of ambition for the future for the sector, which I think is vital as we go forward and look at net zero in a just, fair, equitable way. But we've also had a lot to say about having a collective voice, and that really relies on those of you who have joined us as community energy organisations. It's your voice that we've collected in this report, and we're very grateful to you for the work that you put in throughout the year for the sector, but also in giving us the data to build this report. And finally, thanks to Regen for the work that they've done in compiling that data and presenting it. So there's not much more to do except to repeat Emma's wish at the beginning, that what we really need is a long-term, stable and supportive environment to take community energy into the future. And the State of the Sector report is a key element to that as we go forward year on year, giving us the data we need to complete that. So thank you very much to everyone. And I think the slides and chat will be available. I'm looking for a nod, Philip. Yes, so we should have availability to the slides and chat, and also to the recording of the event. Thank you. Goodbye.